My relationship with the outdoors goes back a long way, both as a scientist but also as someone who's spent a lot of time outdoors, both on the ocean and in the high mountains and indeed in the Antarctic. So it's a great opportunity to talk about those three things. And I thought what I would do is talk about the journey of Ernest Shackleton briefly, a journey that I retraced myself some 7 years ago, but also, other than the fact that it's a wonderful story, there are some great lessons we can take from it that I think can be really usefully reapplied to how we deal with some of the environmental issues we're faced with. There's some really, really wonderful take-homes. Just by way of starting, I know we're talking about the oceans, but I think it's worth briefly mentioning the geography of the Antarctic, because it is a quite remarkable place. It is around twice the size of Australia, 14 million square kilometres to Australia's 7.7 million. It is 58 times the size of the UK, where you can perhaps tell from the accent I'm originally from. It's 12,500 times the size of Hong Kong, some 20,000 times the size of Singapore, and the average thickness of ice on the Antarctic continent is 2,050 metres, so 2K's average thickness of ice. It is the complete inverse, interestingly, of the Arctic, which is essentially more or less a landlocked ocean, about 2,000 metres deep and 15 million square kilometres in size, surrounded by kind of the coastlines of Canada and Russia if you're looking at the roof of the world. But Antarctica is this high, dry, windy, cold continent with this vast amount of ice on it, and we're very concerned about the fact that that ice should not end up in the ocean, of course, contributing to sea level rise, but we're also worried about the state of the ocean around Antarctica. This shot here is taken in Antarctica. It is my bid to cross the place one side to the other on foot back in 1999, and I took the shot just to demonstrate the sheer scale of what we're dealing with down there, because that mountain in the background, those are my tracks coming out of the screen towards you, towards South Pole, still 600 k's away. In the background there, that mountain is about 1,000 metres bigger than Mount Kosciuszko, but only the top 100 metres sticks out of the ice. The other 3,000 is buried. And between where I took that shot and the South Pole itself, still 600 k's away, many more mountains, none of them physically big enough to poke through the ice. You're literally walking over the summits of those mountains on your way to South Pole. 97% of the world's water is in the ocean, which is very topical given what we're talking about today. But of the remaining 3%, 2 is actually locked up in the ice of Antarctica. And if it were all to melt, we would have about a 70-metre global sea level rise, which would mean we would all be talking about the ocean, because it would be right on our doorstep, or indeed we'd be completely inundated. So it's a very, very topical issue. Shackleton, of course, was around during what we now call the heroic era of exploration. So Antarctica really was only kind of, in inverted commas, discovered in 1820. But by the 1890s, 1895, in fact, the first person had sort of slept ashore, if you like, had a night on the Antarctic continent itself. And that began this heroic era of exploration where people were down there trying to explore the interior of the Antarctic. But a lot of the exploration was undertaken by people who'd gone down there to exploit it. Sealers, whalers, all intent on plundering the ocean, and more about that perhaps in my next talk. But Shackleton's goal actually was to cross Antarctica one side to the other on foot. That was his goal, 2,700 k's from one side to the other, and he went down in his ship, the Endurance. The Endurance, of course, has recently been discovered in 4,000 metres depth of water off the coast of Antarctica, perfectly preserved after it had sunk. And its sinking resulted in Shackleton having to abandon his goal of crossing Antarctica, but it resulted in him undertaking this most incredible of survival journeys to save both him and his 27 men that travelled with him from certain death. And, you know, you couldn't write the script. The ship goes down, no one knows where they are, they don't have enough food to survive, they live on the stricken ship for 10 months, they then live on the pack ice for a further 5 months, and then the pack ice breaks up and they have to paddle open rowboats, keelless, 6.5 metre long keelless rowboats to try and reach the nearest land and begin their escape from Antarctica. But Before I just tell the rest of the story, I think there are some really interesting take-home messages from Shackleton and his expedition that I think we can apply to some of the environmental issues we're facing, certainly ocean conservation and climate change, which is my bag. The first of them is that Shackleton was really a consummate manager of change, and he knew that now the goal of crossing Antarctica was gone with the loss of the ship. Now he had to think about the new challenge. The new challenge was saving themselves. Every undertaking has two elements. It's got a vision and a mission. Doesn't matter what you're doing in life. The vision for them was doing something at the limits of human endurance, really pushing things to the absolute limit, exploring new boundaries, both personally and geographically. Shackleton said to all his men, that vision is still intact. It's just the mission has changed. We're not going to cross Antarctica anymore. The new mission is saving ourselves. And I think this is a really relevant message for fossil fuel-based organisations that I speak to a lot. And I say, look, your vision may be providing energy to men and women and businesses to enable them to be all that they can be. That bit can remain intact. It's just the mission, the way you deliver it, that needs to change. I think the era of fossil fuels is well and truly over. We need to think about the way in which you generate that energy. So your vision can remain intact, but your mission needs to change. The second thing I'll say, with the limited time I have, about Shackleton is that he was someone who had what we now call emotional intelligence. He knew who he was, and he knew that if he wanted to get, in his case, 27 men pulling in the same direction to achieve a singular goal, which in this case was their own survival, you've got to go to each person with a slightly different version of the message. Everyone's motivated by slightly different things. A one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. It doesn't work with motivating 27 people to try and save themselves when their ship sinks, and it doesn't motivate people to want to save the world's oceans. We have to think about how we pitch the messages to the different audiences of people we're trying to convince, because it'll take all of us to get this over the line. Guilt and fear, whether it's climate change or ocean health, are not getting the job done. We need to be a lot cleverer with the way we message, with getting everybody to pull in the same direction. In Shackleton's case, I'm here presenting at the Royal Yacht Squadron here in South Australia, so it seems appropriate to talk about a sailing journey. But essentially, this big ship sinks. They spend 10 months on it until it goes down. They live on the pack ice, as I say, for 5 more months. They're starving. No one knows where they are. They're certain to die. The only thing for it is to shelter under the 3 lifeboats they take from the ship, and this is one of them. And they do that on the pack ice for that 5 months until one night the piece of pack ice on which they're sheltering under the boats breaks up. Nothing more to be done than to tip the boats the right way up, get in them, and try and reach the nearest land. Now, the nearest land, unfortunately for them, is some 100 kilometres away. It is a place called Elephant Island, a remote island off the Antarctic Peninsula. Against all the odds, 5 days later, in open rowboats, wearing cotton smocks, woolens, leather boots, temperatures in the far sub-zero, mountainous seas, they make it. They fall ashore, they celebrate, but Shackleton knows no one will find them on Elephant Island because there's nobody there, no one knows where they are, no one goes to Elephant Island, not even the sealers and the whalers of the period. Only thing for it, get in the most seaworthy of the rowboats, attempt another journey, this time 800 nautical miles across the Southern Ocean to try and reach another island, South Georgia, in the far South Atlantic. Mountainous seas, 2 storms and a hurricane, navigating using a sextant to measure an angle to the sun on the 2 occasions that they see it in 17 days at sea, threatening to capsize it all the time, wearing, as I say, non-waterproof clothing. Against absolutely all the odds, they make it to the island of South Georgia. There they fall ashore, they celebrate again, but unfortunately the whaling stations, which were for them their salvation, they were the rescue, they're on the far side of the mountains. These guys had landed on the southern side of the island, the whaling station was on the northern side, they had to cross a mountain range. Again, they do this with no equipment, no tent, no climbing ability, no maps. nails pushed through the soles of their boots for grip, taken out of their packing cases. They do it in a time that even modern mountaineers have been unable to replicate, and reach the whaling station, raise the alarm, save everyone. Remarkable story. Remarkable story. I was asked to do this journey the same way as Shackleton. I'm only 26, look what it's done to me physically. But it teaches you so much about life. It was a fantastic opportunity to do the expedition. I get asked, how do you do it? The how is a very long answer. I certainly don't have time to go into it now, but I think the how, the key thing with the how in anything in life is having a goal you work back from. You've got something you need to achieve. In the case of marine protection in the Antarctic, you know, we have committed to protecting a large proportion of the Southern Ocean from exploitation. Instead, rather than working back from what it would take to achieve that goal, we're just incrementally making small steps, and frankly, not fast enough and not good enough. And the same can be applied to the ocean more broadly, where only a tiny, tiny percentage is protected from human exploitation. We need to work back from what we know we need to have protected to ensure that the health of the ocean is continued going forward, not just incrementally make small steps roughly in the right direction and do that too slowly. That wouldn't achieve anything in an expedition context, and it's certainly not achieving the right thing for the ocean. So we really need to step up. In my case, I needed to assemble a team, rebuild the boat, learn to traditionally navigate. I'm a climber rather than a sailor, so it was quite challenging being at sea in a frankly pretty unseaworthy keelless rowboat sailing across the Southern Ocean. No cheating, no GPS, no EPIRBs, no guidelines, no life jackets, no hidden GPS, Mars bars, knitted underwear from your mother or anything. It was just a keelless rowboat, the same as Shackleton's, with fixed cameras that filmed everything we did. And, you know, frankly, it was extremely, extremely challenging. We did a risk assessment of things we felt could go wrong. It ran to 171 line items of a spreadsheet. But, you know, suffice to say, one thing I would say about the expedition and about the planning is we had a lot of backers to enable this to happen. And in the planning of it all, I would have to give regular updates to these backers. And they didn't want to see spreadsheets or hear about risk assessments or things like that. They wanted to see the boat come together, planks appearing on the boat, because humans are very evidence-based creatures. Seeing is believing. And one of the big problems I always feel with ocean health is that the ocean looks okay. It's there. You don't see what lies beneath the surface, and therein lies the problem. It's up to us to communicate the extent to which it is deteriorating. 30% more acidic. 8 million pieces of plastic entering the world's oceans every day. The average Australian consumes 5 grams, a credit card worth of microplastics every week without even realizing in the food and water that they consume. These things are all hidden from us, and we need to act. We need to be the ones who communicate the extent to which the ocean is deteriorating and act now, and not just say, well, it looks okay, because below the surface, of course, it isn't. As with anything in life, big expeditions, saving the world's oceans, they are huge undertakings, but we have the right people, we have the know-how, we have the will to want to do it. And the key to it is breaking down the enormity of the challenge into manageable pieces to get the job done. On the Shackleton expedition, we didn't think about heroically reaching South Georgia. We thought about the next 1-hour shift, standing there in cotton smocks, leather boots, woolens, in 0.5 degree Celsius seawater, hypothermic, just getting the job done, one small step at a time. When we reached South Georgia, of course, it was a very different place to that which Shackleton reached 100 years before us. Climate change has ravaged this sub-Antarctic island of South Georgia. 90% of the glaciers are in wide-scale retreat, and the journey for us was very different to the one that Shackleton experienced 100 years before we did. This scene here is, of course, of the famous, for want of a better description, bum slide, where Shackleton went 1,500 feet down a 60-degree slope to get down from the high ground to the low ground. Testament to his leadership. When we got there, you know, it was a frightening prospect to have to do the same thing as he had done to reach the low ground, and you just marveled at the leadership that he demonstrated. The final destination for him was the whaling station of Stromness, which for him was functioning. This whaling station, together with the 5 others on South Georgia, this sub-Antarctic island took 186,000 whales out of the ocean. And we know that because they were like cars on a Holden production line. Make, model, year, serial number. We had blue whales, fin whales, minke whales, sei, sperm. We knew the weights, the amount of oil we'd rendered from them, and it was all recorded in gory detail for all of us to see. Whaling has largely stopped. The new problem is far more insidious. It relates to climate change, it relates to pollution, it relates to exploitation of fossil fuels in the Arctic Ocean, it relates to overfishing. These are all things that we have the ability to stop, but we must act as one if we are to do it. This just gives you an idea of the extent of change that we've experienced there. This is not me and it's not Shackleton, it's someone called Duncan Cass who was on South Georgia in the 1950s. The glacier that Cass is travelling across there, Shackleton had to cross from left to right to reach the whaling station. And I think you'll see when I went down there 3 years ago, that glacier has gone altogether. And as I say, seeing is believing. Glaciers are a very good way of communicating degradation, and we need to find the same thing for the ocean. As I say, just because it looks okay doesn't mean it is okay. It'll take all of us to make that change. Why do I do what I do? Wrapping up. Expeditions, because I'm a scientist by original training, expeditions are about pushing your personal boundaries, enjoying that more resourceful side of yourself that emerges when you put yourself in sticky situations. But really, as an environmental scientist, as much as anything now, the expeditions are something that afford me the opportunity to speak to politicians, to world leaders, to environment ministers, to hard-nosed corporate executives who don't believe, to the members of the public, to school kids, and get the message across almost by stealth. I push my little Shackleton boat inside the walls, and at night you emerge and deliver your environmental message. And we, all that are assembled here today, both online and in person, have a role to play in protecting the world's oceans. We need to get on with it. It can be done, but we must act now. We must act as one. And thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak. Thanks.
Thank you.